For our next tutorial, we want to look at organizing data as a table. So let's go off to this property sheet. You can see this is a much longer data set, has a couple hundred rows, and also has a lot of columns. Sometimes when you're scrolling down a data set, it can be hard to tell which data is in which columns, especially when you have a lot of things that sound kind of similar. So sometimes it's useful to do what's called a freeze pane. But before I do that, in the instructions, it says to move the parcel ID to column A. So let's suppose that one of the things that they look at when they're evaluating the data in this spreadsheet is a parcel ID. So in order to freeze that, we may want to put it in the leftmost column. So I'm going to right click on that and I'm going to select cut, and then I'm going to go to the first column, column A, and select that. And one of the options is insert cut cells. Notice that when you cut cells and then select a column, it doesn't replace it. It moves everything over to the right. So I'm going to insert the cut cells, and I still have the original column A, which was month. So now let's select the parcel ID, column A, and then I'm going to go to the View tab, and then one of the options is Freeze Panes. So now I'm going to select Freeze First Column. So now when I'm scrolling left and right, let's suppose I'm looking at a particular parcel ID, and I can see the name of it, even though I have additional columns, it freezes this column. Probably know from Info 120 that you can also do things like right click and hide a column, and then to get it back you can select columns that are adjacent and unhide to get it back. You can also freeze panes for the first row, freeze the top row. So now when you scroll down, you always have your headings. Okay, so going back to the instructions, we've seen how to freeze the first row or the first column of a spreadsheet. Now let's insert a table. Now this is different than a pivot table. A table is used more to interactively look at individual records as opposed to summarizing the data. So back in the property spreadsheet, if I click on Insert and then Table, it'll ask what range I have for the data, and by default it'll pick all of the adjacent cells, which in this case is what I want. And I also want to check that my data table has headers. So the first row are the field names for the different columns. So I click OK, and it formats the data. It keeps all the data there. It's much different than a pivot table. But now each of the column headings is a drop-down box that can be used to filter the data. So let's suppose in this appraised value column, you can see the ranges starting at 0 all the way up to 650,000. Let's suppose I wanted to look at only those that are greater than 100,000. So I can select the greater than, type 100,000, and it's automatically limiting. You can also do filtering by dates. So if you have a set of data that has a date, I could look at unselect check all and then check, say, just the month of January. You could also look at text data. So I could click the drop down box under whatever this is and just look at this Miami Lakes, and there's only one of them. You can clear the filters by selecting all or just by clearing it. Another thing you can do with the numeric, let me clear the filter from appraised value. I could do a number filter and select a top 10 list. Top 10 items would be the largest values, or I could do the top 10%. I can change the 10 to, say, 25. It still has the other filter. I forget what all I've previously filtered that hasn't been cleared, but the January month. So you can see that you can, I don't know why that won't clear. But you can see that you can interactively do all sorts of different searching and reporting based on these interactive tables.